Winston Churchill, a great leader for the time. A look at his stand against hate. In World War II, Winston Churchill took a stand by inspiring and leading British victory over Adolf Hitler and his Nazi Party. His leadership led the way to work with Allied leaders, U.S. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and Soviet Premier Joseph Stalin that ended hate-based Nazi rule across the world. World War II was an extraordinary time in the world. The German Empire was gaining world power, hate for the Jewish people was great, and leaders took a stand in opposition. With Adolf Hitler and Nazi Germany rising, the British Empire needed a leader, Winston Churchill. Winston Leonard Spencer Churchill was born on November 30th, 1874, in Blenheim Palace in Oxfordshire, England. Churchill was a reporter and soldier before ever holding public office. He ached for adventure. As a reporter in 1899, Churchill went to South Africa to cover the war between the Boers. He was captured and imprisoned, but he made a bold escape. He became a champion overnight, and this led to Churchill's first ever position in public office as he was elected to the British Parliament in 1900. Churchill assumed the position of First Lord of the Admiralty in 1911. He was the civilian leader of the Royal Navy and was of the few people that knew another war was to come, and he prepared the Royal Navy for the challenge. Churchill was in power, but then devised a faulty strategy to attack the Dardanelles and the Gallipoli Peninsula that were controlled by Turkey. This strategy failed, and Churchill was correctly held responsible. He then resigned from the position of First Lord of the Admiralty as a result. He thought of himself as a political failure, and from his resignation until the appearance of wartime once again, Churchill was gone from the public eye, even though he held minor government positions. Churchill slowly recognized the threat of Nazi Germany as Hitler gained power and was not an advocate of the appeasement policy of Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain. Once the war started, Germany's successful naval assault was seen as a black eye to the Royal Navy and the English people. As a consequence, Neville Chamberlain was dismissed from public office by Parliament, and Churchill was appointed Prime Minister and Minister of Defense by King George VI on May 10, 1940. Days after accepting the position of Prime Minister, France was invaded and fell to the Nazis. The German Air Force moved into France and started an air assault on England, also known as the Battle of Britain. During these dark days, Winston Churchill marshaled the strength of the British Empire with stirring actions and words.
Let us therefore brace ourselves to our duty, and so bear ourselves that if the British Empire and its Commonwealth last for 1,000 years, men will still say, this was their finest hour.
Churchill instilled the English to their duty. Churchill also cited,
We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender.
This motivated the English people to believe in the ultimate successful outcome of World War II. But Winston Churchill's greatest achievement was to convince Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the U.S. President, about the dire consequences of the defeat of the English and the need of America to at least assist the British or come into the war on their side. The first major action was the Lend-Lease Act of March 11, 1941, when the United States agreed to provide military equipment and supplies to Great Britain, most significantly to counter the Nazi U-boat threat to Britain's ability to survive.
In 1941, the unrestricted submarine warfare practiced by the Nazis just about brought Great Britain to her knees. A key program in countering the threat posed by the submarines was the Lend-Lease program, which included the release of 50 elderly United States destroyers to Great Britain to be modified to use as long-range escorts to escort convoys between North America and England.
The long-term pre-war objectives between the two nations were cemented in a secret face-to-face meeting to write the Atlantic Charter. Everything was brought to a head by the Japanese attack at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii on December 7, 1941, which caused the Nazis to declare war on the United States. With the entry of the Soviet Union against Nazi Germany in 1941, a strong triad of allies was formed, represented at the top by Winston Churchill, Franklin Roosevelt, and Joseph Stalin. Famous meetings occurred among these leaders to set the tone for the conduct of the war. Included was the definition of Nazi Germany as a primary enemy, the establishment of post-war boundaries, and the entry of the Soviet Union in the war against Japan. Churchill was one of the few leaders, and certainly the only national leader, to recognize the threat of communism in the post-war world.
By the end of the war, the military contribution made by Great Britain was dwarfed by that made by the Soviet Union and the United States. As a consequence, Churchill had less and less say at the bargaining table with Stalin and Roosevelt. Roosevelt was sick, and Stalin cleared the table by absorbing a lot of countries under the Soviet Empire. Churchill had been warning about the communist threat that manifested itself later on and resulted in the Cold War, which we talk about so much today.
If Winston Churchill didn't take a stand as an inspiring and powerful leader during World War II, the outcome of the war may have been different. World War II finally ended on September 2nd, 1945. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill's strong leadership in the war had both short and long-term impacts. With the defeat of Nazi Germany, the British Empire survived as a result, and along with Nazi Germany, Japan was conquered. The longer-term impacts of Winston Churchill's leadership was the realization that his warnings were correct. The boundaries set before the close of the war resulted in large numbers of people and countries being enslaved by the communist Soviet Empire. Among those affected were Albania, Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, East Germany, Hungary, Poland, and Romania, as well as mainland China, Manchuria, and other Eastern nations. The Cold War persisted until 1991, but the end began with the tearing down of the Berlin Wall in 1989. Of course, to today, the Cold War with mainland China still persists. If we had only listened to Winston, of course, these long-term effects may have never happened. Winston Churchill was truly a significant figure and possibly the most important personality of the 20th century. He preserved world freedom and stood alone until his campaign for a group of allies. Once the Big Three was formed, the possibility of Nazi defeat was greater. His extraordinary insight was proven correct several times, and he inspired victory through courage and remains a unique and paramount figure.